Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to my live stream. My name is Luke. I'm again a member of Guild Umbra. Happy member. Uh, and in this video, we're going to be touching base on another build for the DPS Medic that I came across. Uh, I didn't. I can't by any means you know take credit for this build. This came from the Wildstorm forums. Uh, Sort of just put it together and thrown it into a video for people who are interested in sort of getting some builds out there and getting some feedback, some detailed information about the medic DPS. So let's go ahead and jump in. I'm going to hopefully do this a little quicker than my last video. It was pretty long. Anywho, first ability, Discharge. It's Builder. Builds one actuator. Talked about it in my last video, so I won't talk too much about a lot of these abilities. I'll just briefly touch base on them and move on because we have a lot to discuss. Discharge is your builder. Single target damage, one target. Run gamma rays. Fissure is your debuff. You put it on. Usually running at, that's usually the first ability I use before proceeding to go into different abilities as far as rotational stuff. But anywho, the new ability that I added that's different from the first build I did is Devastator Pros. It is a dot damage over time. And it ticks every 2 seconds for 12 seconds, so 6 ticks. Collider I talked about. It's a instant ability. It sometimes can be used as a filler. Atomize is a proc ability on a critical hit. So you always want to be aware of this ability when it procs up to go ahead and use it and get it on cooldown and continue through your rotation with your other abilities. It's just added damage, added burst damage on top of your other abilities. Utility tree. We took your CC, which I talked about. It's the only hard CC that you have as a medic. Paralytic Surge. And Calm, another CC breaker. I mentioned it in the last video. Won't go too much into it. And that's about it as far as Assault. I guess while we're here, we can talk about tiers. Again, I went with the Tier 8 Discharge because you gain 2 charges by allowing all 3 ticks of damage to hit the foes. Gamma Rays, single target. Landing a hit on a foe with all beams builds one actuate. Pretty sweet. Real quick, if you're going AoE, I don't think I did this in my last video. Quantum Cascade. If you have 2 or more enemies, you do more amp damage than you would with Gamma Rays because it is AoE damage. So basically I took the tier 8 because landing a hit with all ticks refunds 2 actuators. It can only occur every 10 seconds, so you obviously can't spam it to get your refunds because it does have a cooldown on that tier. Go ahead and take that off and go back to Gamma Rays, tier 8 it out. Devastator Pros. Okay, now people were asking me, well, why would you go with Devastator Pros? In the past, Devastator Pros, and any of the pros a medic had, you cast it at one time to start it, and you had to cast it again to detonate it. Well, that's not the case. They've switched around the tiers a little bit and allowed you, with this particular tier 4 and Devastator Probes, to be able to detonate the probe, dealing 50% of the probe's potential damage and consume the probe. So basically my thinking and many of the other people's thinking is this is a DPS increase when you think about it. Because let's say I lead with Fisher, then I pop Devastator probes and let it tick. Then I continue doing my filler normal spells that I always do. But I hold off on hitting Collider or Fisher again the second time around. And the reason I do this is because if I wait until the very last tick of damage on the Devastator probes and I hit my Fisher or my Collider to detonate them, I get 50% more damage, if that makes sense. So, that's the idea around this build, and it will show in our amps as well. Again, I will state that it is important to know that, not all builds are static. You can be very flexible in your builds and your action sets up here to move some abilities around to kind of, give you the ability to be different in your group or raid, to give something that maybe someone else in your group that's a medic doesn't have. So in that case, I would take Calm out. I could use Root, which is magnetic lockdown. I could use Empowering probes, which is an overall damage increase. Not as good as it used to be, but still viable. I could use Antidote. Yeah, it doesn't do damage, but it takes 2 dispel. It dispels 2 debuffs off yourself and 5 other allies. Might be a big deal, especially if your healer doesn't have a dispel on his action set. Just a thought. Also, urgency gets you out of those moments where, gosh, why did I use all my dash charges and now this telegraph's about to hit me and kill me? Well, urgency, when you use it, blinks you forward 20 meters, and you get a little movement speed at the end of that 20 meters to reposition yourself. So, it's viable. You could also, to help your healer out, maybe throw a mending probe on your bar. Do some healing. Help your healer out. Being a former healer in most MMOs, that's a rarity. To have the ability to have other party members help you out with heals. A lot of people are so focused on DPS or tanking or whatever they may be doing in their current roles that they don't, throw a heal out there. Help your group. All right, I think that covers the abilities for this particular build. Let's talk about amps. Amps are basically, like I said in my last video, temporary buffs to your character or static stat increases to your character that are available through amp points. Now, you start with 45 amp points. I don't think I mentioned this. Well, you don't start with them, but you can get up to 45 amp points, and then you have Elder Gems, which can give you those extra few amp points to get to 55, and that's why that is available on WS Base, which is the website we're using. So not a lot has changed from the previous build. I still took my static increase amps, as you can see. I left one of these out, and in hindsight, I kind of wish I didn't. But I did that because we need, if we're running probes, to have this ability happen. And you may be asking, well, what's so big about this ability, this big particular amp, where you didn't pick this? Why'd you do that? Well, basically, as it says, it grants 25% chance to reapply Devastator probes and mending probes to foes and allies when they are detonated. So, you're like, okay, so what? Well, let's think about this for a second. If you have a chance to reapply your Devastator probes via this amp, You don't have to waste the global cooldown by casting Devastator probes. Again, in your rotation, you can continue doing damage like you need to do. It's not. I don't think falls into that have to have amp category. But I think it's one of those things where, if you have it on your action set, it might be worth trying it out and seeing if it's a difference. One amp, or actually 2 amps that I had to get there, were one is power converter. This is somewhat confusing ish amp, but it was much better than these other 2 amps that I was looking at. In hindsight, I probably could have took Null Zone over this. Um, and actually, I might change that to Null Zone. Yeah, I think I will do that. Give me 1 second. Because, having the ability to reduce your opponent's assault power helps everyone out. It helps your tank out, take less damage. It helps your healer out to have to heal more damage, and you're a DPS. So overall contribution to the group, awesome, in my opinion. Again, it's one of those things where if you have another medic running it in your particular group or raid, maybe change it up and go back to power converter. Again, there's flexibility here, just like with the amp. The abilities. So, the other ability, this can be a very confusing, and it was a bugged amp for a while. Um, but having the amp here and here allows me to get this amp. So I'm not going to focus too much on these because obviously, people are going to say, well, hey, you can get power converter and it's better. And I can't disagree with that because I don't have anything in front of me that's saying, mathematically that's better or worse than the amps I've chosen. So I can't really say that. Um, so pick what you want if you want to go this way. Lastly, I think I went with this quick dodge again. It's just nothing to me that having the ability to break out of a CC that's being placed upon you, get out of a telegraph. You just can't say that it's not worth. In my opinion, it's not worth taking that amp. Not only that, but you add on the shield and the dash counter. Are you kidding me? In my opinion, it's an ability that you should be running. I see a lot of medics run it in raids. And, the majority of the mobs that you see in dungeons, adventures, and raids will stun you. So being able to get out of that stun quickly and get back to damaging, or getting out of a telegraph, helps, move the group along. So why not take it? Cooldown reduction. Again, it may not seem much, but it's kind of worth it. I think I've already talked about all these in previous um, video, but I will briefly go over them. Critical hit, more atomized procs, more damage. So take it. Crit hit severity. Talked about that in my stat priority video, but it basically makes your critical hits hit harder. Why not? Take it. Um, people are going to look at this build and they're going to say, well, okay, have you really tested this build? And the answer is, honestly, I've only had 1 weekend of it, and I'm still working through some of the bugs, and practicing and the rotation a little bit. And honestly, in my opinion, it feels clunky having to use a global cooldown, an extra one, on something like that. But if you remember in my previous build, I had empowering probes. So, it's one of those things where, okay, you ask yourself, is it important to be pumping out a dot on multiple mobs at that, up to 5 foes? Or is it important to grant a buff to my party? You know, again, Wildstar limited action sets are very flexible. And by no means do I say that this build is the end all of all builds for DPS Medic. There's a lot of flexibility here. This is just a build that I'm going to continue to test. First impressions were it was an increase in damage, but it was an increase to my individual damage, whereas the last build kind of improved everyone's damage, if that makes sense, because empowering probes go on all your party and increases that damage dealt by a certain percent. So you kind of have to think about some of that stuff when you're building these things and testing them out. So anyway, that's my second build. Look forward to diving into some of the medic healing. I don't have a whole lot of actual experience with healing as far as end game, but I look forward to diving into it. I want to thank you guys again for tuning in and checking me out. I hope you enjoyed the video, and there'll be more coming. Have a good night.